All right, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Talks with Toe. Today, I have a very special guest with me, Jack VanDrunen. Is that how you pronounce your last name?
That's really good. I'm impressed, unless Josh told you that's how to pronounce
No,
it.
I assumed it was VanDrunen, but I mean,
Yeah,
you
no,
never know.
that's very good.
Cool. Okay, so Jack is I guess you would say a friend of Josh.
I would say I'm a friend of Josh. I'm a very close friend of Josh.
He talks a lot about you, so very highly, of course. But so give me a little bit about your background, and also he told me a little bit about where you're hoping to go to in terms of grad school stuff. So we'll talk a little bit about that as well.
Yeah, so I am a computer science major here at UCI. I'm a fourth year, and my specialization is in intelligent systems. I was exposed over the years to some stuff outside of the field of computer science and social science and philosophy. Through the honors program here at UCI and their curriculum. And I ended up getting involved with research with a professor in the Department of Logic and Philosophy of Science. One thing led to another. Now I'm about to accept an offer for a PhD in the Department of Logic and Philosophy of Science. And so I'm kind of pivoting outside of my typical field or stereotypical uses of computer science, but into an area where I think that I can apply my skills, my computational skills, in ways that are useful and needed for their field and which I find really interesting.
Okay, so for people who are maybe listening to this and aren't, as aware of what, the philosophy of science is, like I know what it is generally speaking, but it's not my field as well. But like, how would you describe that as a field? Like, what are you studying?
Yeah, so I think like scientists do two main things. They go out and collect data, and they figure out how to build a theory about the world from the data that they've collected. And philosophers of science basically do those things, but introspectively. And so you care more about the ways in which scientists are going about collecting data, the ways in which data sometimes doesn't determine what a theory about the world, what the world actually is, when you try to dig beyond it, beyond your measurements of things in the world. And you see that in, like, for example, in physics today, there are a lot of unsolved problems, and you might think, well, here we have the most advanced particle accelerators and maybe mathematical tools and so many experimentalists doing good, productive science in the lab. Why don't we know what dark matter is? Why can't we unify quantum mechanics and general relativity into a single theory of everything? And the answer is because it's not necessarily that we don't have enough data. We probably don't have enough data, but we also haven't kind of broken through the barrier of how do we fit all of this information into a coherent picture of the universe. So that's one thing that philosophers of science do, and a lot of people in theoretical physics, or at least some people in theoretical physics, ended up going to philosophy departments over the past, say, half century because of the mainly experimental push in physics departments in the university. And so if you wanted to be thinking about the big questions,
right,
as probably a decent number of people go into physics secretly kind of do want to be doing, right, you end up, if you can, getting a job in a philosophy department and doing philosophy of physics. But in reality, most philosophers of physics still are physicists. They're just kind of approaching things in a different way. There's also a lot of work in the area of values in science, which is basically, here we have these scientists who say the world is one thing, but sometimes the public doesn't jump on board with what scientists are saying. Like, I mean, in the United States, big issues are like climate change, evolution, perhaps, things like that. And so you wonder, well, if all these smart people think the world is the way it is, why aren't people jumping on board with it? And so another big part of philosophy of science is, and sort of philosophy of science conceived as philosophy of science instead of philosophy of physics or biology or something deals with the interaction among scientists, but also between scientists and the public in sort of the public discourse.
Yeah, so that's very interesting because I think that's kind of like part of the reason I started delving into like this podcast series instead, because I realized that there seems to be like, it's not like a very unknown thing, but there is a disconnect between communication within the academic realm, so to speak, and I guess you would say the general populace. And I think everyone knows that, but and a lot of people have tried different things to like, you know, address that, fill that gap, bridge that gap, whatever you want to say. But there is still just like this underlying like disconnect, because I think part of it is there is disagreement on different topics within the scientific community, and even within the scientific community there are gaps between, like, for instance, the philosophy department and like the more what people traditionally see as STEM sciences. How do you see that as like maybe contributing to it? Like, what are maybe some of the barriers between that communication, so to speak, also?
I think there is a tendency for people to interpret. So I'm a Christian. I interact with a lot of people who don't like sort of anything that reeks of an older Earth than like 10,000 years. And I don't know where you stand on the issue. But I might not. I don't necessarily want to get into where I stand on the issue because it's still such a controversial issue. Some things you just stay away with unless you actually have the time to unpack it. But I think there is a good example, because I try to stay kind of up to date on the discourse in the young Earth creationist sphere. You see a lot of people will interpret disagreements about small things, relatively small things in the mainstream science, and say, well, see, science doesn't know scientists don't even know what they're doing, and so why should we trust them? And I think that that's a bit of an overreaction. I think that it's an easy jump to make, kind of conceptually, from like, well, these people can't agree on their theory, so why should we buy into the theory if even the people who claim to hold it actually disagree on sometimes fairly big details of the theory. But I think that's not really a good way of approaching it, even though it's tempting, because science is about investigation, and when people are investigating theories, sometimes you kind of have to reckon with things that challenge theories, but in ways that that can be used constructively to build on top of existing theories, rather than saying, oh, well, this whole scientific enterprise is a bust just because we scientists can't decide on some particular detail of radiocarbon dating or something like that. And I think that, where was I? There was one other point that came to mind when you asked your question, but it's slipping my mind right now.
Okay, yeah, I mean, it is a very broad topic, because I think in terms of what I've seen also, like, there is, I guess, the rate at which communication is happening now is that there is a lot of difficulty in terms of filtering information that is maybe corroborated, even within the scientific field. Like, the number of publications that exist nowadays, like, just on a purely, like, broad level of science is, like, significantly more than was even 30 years ago, and part of that is just because of the internet. But with that, like, that does complicate things even within the scientific realm, because there are a lot of papers that get published in the scientific realm that are that might be great papers and they just get no traction. And then there's also the vice versa, where there might be papers that get a lot of traction but they actually have no corroboration. And it's difficult even for scientists now, because since there's this ease of access to information, sorting through what information is, like, good and taking the time to critically examine each of those items of research is a lot more difficult now. So that might be a little bit of the realm of, like, how do you deal with that as a data wide level, but also how do you deal with that like philosophically? If you increase more information, is that necessarily like a good thing? So
yeah, that is a good question. I mean, I think of in the social sciences, psychology, and I suppose I don't know what counts as a social science these days. Everyone has everyone has different opinions, right?
Yeah.
But there's this general there's this thing that's thrown around a lot now, like the replication crisis. I'm not sure if you've heard of that term before.
I don't think I've heard of the term like defined explicitly, but I've heard it used.
I mean, it basically means here we have all of these papers published in good journals that purport to be doing good science, but people start to go back, and as part of a healthy scientific enterprise, you try to replicate these studies. And it turns out you do the experiments described again, you get different results that don't match up with what the conclusions of the papers actually were. And I don't actually know the numbers off the top of my head, but there have been estimates that a large proportion of these scientific experiments in the social sciences just aren't replicatable, which is something that doesn't exactly raise our confidence in the ability of people to do these things well. But again, I think that it would be kind of throwing the baby out with the bathwater to say, well, see, this is why social sciences aren't actually worthwhile pursuits. I think the other thing I was going to talk about was that there are some disagreements between some philosophers and scientists in a way that isn't the way that like philosophers of science go about doing things. You have people who kind of are, I don't want to say postmodern, but you have people who kind of have kind of fundamental disagreements with the idea of science as traditionally conceived, or think that there are a lot of other influences in science that actually completely dominate the field, and like, I don't know, Western colonialism or something that dominate the field and prevent it from doing what it's supposed to be doing. And that's not as much the sort of fights that a lot of the philosophers of science that I know want to pick.
Yeah, I mean that's
more like philosophers who maybe are interested in the phenomenon of science or something like that, in kind of a more abstract way. A lot of philosophers of science are very much in the trenches themselves, doing some real, scientific stuff, but just kind of trying to be more introspective about it.
Yeah, I did have a conversation with a philosophy of mathematics, I think.
Okay.
But the way she described it is that there's, I guess, like this growing schism within philosophy as a field in general. I don't know if you have experience of that. She like very vaguely talked about it, but I guess there is like a disagreement on like kind of what you're talking about, like this, like, is any of the philosophy that's been done by previous philosophers like worthwhile? Like question.
Yeah.
Because I guess that's what philosophy majors talk about.
Yeah, but, they kind of deconstruct themselves.
Yeah. So I guess there's like apparently a schism that's happening at the moment within the wider philosophy field in general, kind of around that issue, right? Like, because like philosophers in general, at least canonically, what we view as philosophers typically come from like, starting from Aristotle, Plato, etc., Greek, and eventually moving to Enlightenment, that area. Like, it's like mostly Western thinkers. So like that's there's like a segment of, I guess, subpopulation of philosophers who view that as, I guess, not sufficient. And because of that, they disregard most of those philosophers as like being legitimate enough because, like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Whatever the reasons might be.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm still kind of new to the philosophy world, or at least the the modern philosophy scene. So I don't think I'll comment much on most of that. I think there is another kind of divide in some ways. So UCI actually has two departments of philosophy.
Interesting. Okay.
They have the Department of Philosophy, which is, I believe, in the School of Humanities, and then they have the Department of Logic and Philosophy of Science, which is my department. In the School of Social Sciences. And the difference, I suppose there are just different emphases mainly, but the department broke up back maybe around the turn of the 21st century over, I think one of the main things is like there was a small subpopulation of philosophers in the department who wanted to do more naturalistic stuff in their philosophy. So kind of actually, you integrate your philosophical questions with the questions that are being asked in other fields. So if you want to learn about not what is, human knowledge or something like that, maybe one avenue of study might be, well, let's go into the lab, or let's at least review the psychological literature and see, well, what do our experiments with humans in the lab show us how humans get knowledge, use knowledge, make decisions, compare values, things like that, and so that's why this department is in the School of Social Sciences, I guess. They're on friendly terms, the departments, and they don't step on each other's toes, but there aren't as many, there aren't really any medievalists, say, in the Logic and Philosophy of Science department, but there also aren't many people who do, say, pure logic or philosophy of physics or anything like that in the philosophy, the regular department of philosophy. So that's that was an interesting thing to be introduced to over the course of my few years in interaction with these departments.
Okay, yeah. I mean, that's kind of what I've heard also, and it is. I mean, I'm new to that. That's not really my area, but it is important because you are asking kind of the more profound, difficult questions that are less easy to quantify, right?
Yeah. I think that's kind of a very good one-sentence description of what philosophy is.
Yeah. So I guess we talked a little bit through messaging each other that you are a little bit interested in artificial intelligence, and obviously coming from a computer science background, you can't really avoid that topic nowadays.
Yeah, that's kind of true. Most people do.
Yeah, so I guess what are your views on, maybe we should start with what are your views on what artificial intelligence actually is? We'll start there, and then maybe we can talk about what some of the misconceptions people have about artificial intelligence is.
Yeah, so the UCI's computer science program is really excellent. They have these depth requirements, which means that you specialize in a particular field, and so I chose to specialize in artificial intelligence. So I've taken quite a few classes that touch on that or on related topics like probability. And I find it really interesting that I managed to do some people actually can avoid artificial intelligence in a computer science degree. Some schools, smaller schools, might have one or two classes that cover most of those things. So I'm very blessed to have been in a department where I could take 5 or 6 courses on artificial intelligence, and I say that in part because everyone wants to be an AI futurist these days, and I'm probably not actually qualified to be an AI futurist.
Yeah.
It would be nice to have a job where if I actually produced anything, I would get fired because my job is to think about what the future is and not what the present is. But yeah. So what artificial intelligence is, right? That was the first thing. Yeah. I think there are definitely a lot of misconceptions about artificial intelligence. It's hard for me to know what people think of when they think AI. I think you do bioinformatics or something, right? So you probably have certain ideas of what AI are that kind of don't fit the typical stereotypes of what people think, like Terminator robots or whatever.
Yeah.
So a big part of AI these days is learning. The idea that we have a system, we don't give it information right away about what to do, but that instead we provide it with information over time, and it has to learn to accommodate the information and perform actions or do some computation or something like that. So learning is one part of AI, and it's kind of eclipsed all of the other parts now. But there are other parts of AI. There's inference, which is basically building really complicated logical systems that will give you, that will produce answers to questions that you ask it. And you might think of something like something to aid medical diagnosis. You have some list of symptoms. You can do inference to come up with a differential diagnosis, and give the most likely causes of those symptoms for the patient, given the patient's history and all of those things. And so one thing you could do that with learning, but a lot of people still prefer to, especially in like the professional field, still prefer to use inference systems, just because you don't always know what you're getting when you train a machine to do something. Well, if you actually are all the rules that you're giving something, then it can do things a lot faster than you can, and in more subtle ways than you can. But at least there's some transparency. You can open up the box, look at, this is sort of this is the area, like if a patient has a cough, this is the direction that the program is running in to find out what's going on with the patient. And then the other pillar of AI is search. And so here you would think of, like, say, chess AI, where I don't play that much chess, but I have played online, or I have played chess against a computer, right? And that's obviously been a very famous thing, and the breakthroughs in the public sphere have often been in the terms of playing games like Jeopardy, or recently Go, which no one thought that a computer was ever going to beat Go. And the reason is that the Go board is 19 by 19 or something.
Yeah, it's very large.
Very large. And so what that means is that you have an enormous number of possible moves, just on any given turn.
Right.
And then the way a search algorithm works is that then you play forward a bit. So you simulate, if you make a move and then your opponent makes a move, then you make a move, your opponent makes a move, going kind of down this search tree. How good of a move will my next move be? And then you find what the best next move is. With Go, the numbers just explode, because, I mean, if you think about it, if you have, say, 100 possible moves, then your opponent has 100 possible moves. That's already, just to simulate all of those possible worlds, you're dealing with 10,000, I think, possible moves. And then if you want to do it again for your next move, you have 1 million, and it just expands by, in this exponential way. Chess is easier because there are just a more limited number of moves, and you have kind of a good idea because you can see kind of what pieces are going to be taken or in danger or whatever. There are clearer ways of rating how good a particular board looks. So the best case scenario in a game like tic-tac-toe, you can literally just play to the end of the game. That would take an hour to write an AI that would actually play through the end of the game, and then always choose for sure the best move.
Yeah.
With chess, you have good estimation. You can say the board 4 moves away, if I make this move, looks really good for me in a quantifiable way. With Go, it's actually a lot less clear, because so it was really impressive that Google was able to come up with an AI that could at least beat the best Go players some of the time. But that's kind of the other one. There you're basically just going through a ton of different possible universes, basically, and finding the route to the best one, sort of like what is it, Doctor Strange in the Avengers. So those are kind of the 3 things that make up the world of AI right now.
That's definitely pretty much my understanding of it too. And like, I think at least in the healthcare field, a lot of that is like what you were talking about, like how do you use information to determine the best clinical outcomes, best clinical decisions. There's a lot of looking at how do you create clinical support decisions using artificial intelligence, and that's like a multi-tiered system, right? Like you have your data collection system, like how do you identify what data is relevant, and then from that data, how do you utilize that relevant to enable a machine to pick out the trends, right? And like pick out the decisions. But like there's also, I guess, there is a lot of that press about like AI is gonna take over X, Y, or Z, you know.
Right.
I mean, the self-driving car one is like the most, it's the highest profile area. But I think a lot of people are kind of jumping the gun, or in my opinion, are jumping the gun on what self-driving cars mean and what they're actually capable of now. Because, I mean, recently, like, Tesla's had a lot of lawsuits because of just, like, crashes related to AI self-driving, right? And that's like, if you're in the field of like computer science, like that's not really that surprising to you,
right? No, it's really not.
Yeah, I don't know what your opinions on that are.
Have you taken so there is a self-driving car service operating in Irvine right now.
I've seen it. Yeah,
you can actually sign up for free and get rides all around Irvine, which is really cool. I don't know if I'm allowed to say the name on air, but but it's pretty cool. When I've done that, they had a kind of a shift last month to a different company, but it's the same kind of program. And I've been a part of both of those, and it's cool to see the software improving over the times that you're running. It's also a little bit scary to think, well, before there were these cars out on the road with this less great software. And so that was really my first experience with self-driving cars. I think that I always would joke with the drivers, because obviously these cars still had drivers, that I know too much about computer vision to trust a self-driving car, but yet here I am because I'm just attracted to the thrill.
Yeah.
I think that in many ways that's really true. It really surprises me. Vision is a really hard problem. I've done a little bit of research with a professor who does, in the cognitive science world, who does vision research and three-dimensional reconstruction of scenes. And that's really one of the big problems. I think that on the surface, if you have a program that can pick out all of the objects in a picture of a table or something like that, that's really cool. It's not what people typically think of as AI, I think, but it's actually a problem we haven't solved yet, which is kind of remarkable given how much money and computational power we're throwing at it. And so I think that, you know, before people worry about AI taking over, you have to worry about computers actually being able to do things that humans just kind of take for granted. Self-driving cars are a good example because they're out there. They're big now. And a lot of people work in the transportation industry. And I suppose when people talk about AI taking over, they generally don't mean the sort of Terminator or War Games taking over the nuclear launch codes or something like that, but they mean taking over an industry and kicking out all of the workers. And I suppose that that probably is in the future. To what extent that's in the future, I'm not sure, because I think in some ways we underestimate how nice it is to interact with humans and how people really might not be willing to move to a society where you just don't interact with humans anymore, which is kind of what a society where the transportation and service industries are all taken over by robots is like in some ways. I worked at a startup that was doing things with sort of in the vein of Amazon Go.
Okay.
You automate stores.
Yeah.
Kind of. You track people when they walk in, what they pick up when they go through the store. You charge them when they walk out, but they don't need to go through like a complicated checkout process or anything like that. Sort of like a grab and go sort of idea. I haven't been to the Amazon Go stores, but I hear that they're kind of becoming a staple of the Seattle area at the very least, where you just kind of, I need some bread, I'll just go down to the Amazon Go store and pick it up. And so that's another area that I think is it's a little bit still on cutting edge, where cars are almost blasé now. But another area where probably that there will be a lot of break-in in that industry over the next few years.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. And like it'll be interesting to see, because I think that kind of gets into the question of like, well, at what point is integrating like these systems like overdoing it? Because the human element is always the element we know the least about, right? Like it's the aspect about the universe that we kind of don't understand at all. And like I can safely say that as like someone working in just the genetic side of things, and it's just like the amount that we know about even the genetics is just like very minimal.
Yeah.
To be quite frank, like even though we've sequenced the human genome and like we've done it a lot of times at this point, like every time we sequence a new genome, there's another aspect that we just do not understand about it. And statistically, it's just not like there's too much variance. It's like
yeah, and I mean even stepping out of the genetic side, which I think it is interesting to what extent genetics plays a role in who we are, and there are lots of philosophical implications, I suppose, to that sort of discussion. But into, say, the world of the mind, conceived less reductionistically, there's a lot we don't really know, and it is interesting. But I suppose if you think that humans taken as a large community act in predictable ways, kind of increasing your sample size to decrease your variance, then maybe you can kind of predict what people will do when you introduce some new thing into society. But of course that gets into scary stuff too, because we don't necessarily want the government to be treating us as a sort of a solved problem, say, or a corporation to be treating us as a solved problem, where it's very predictable. We introduce this tax and people quit smoking or quit driving or something like that, or we introduce these advertisements and people buy more of our products. Like in some ways it's kind of scary to me, even though I don't really think about my data very much. For someone with the background that I have, which actually one of my early interests in the world of technology was in security and privacy. I mean, the Edward Snowden leaks were back when I was fairly early on in high school. Yeah. And, kind of a very influential part of my development in like, oh yes, I want to do computer science. I want to work in the field of technology. What do I want to do? And for a long time I thought that both communication systems and by extension sort of the security and privacy of these communication systems was where I wanted to go. And so you would think with all of that background, I would be really skeptical about where I put my data, and I would be using DuckDuckGo, and I would whatever. But actually I'm really normal in most ways, where I still use Google, I still use Chrome. Just because of the convenience factor that it provides. That's
the most relevant one, I think. And I think in terms of where things are heading now, like that topic is probably at the forefront, because more or less that is how a lot of the big companies are using people's data as like a deterministic way to predict whether or not people will buy A product or B product. And then there is also now this ongoing discussion, at least in the United States, of like, well, is that a problem that should be solved by government, or can it be solved by government at all? Like, is it even a problem? Like, so right. Like there's a lot of different views on that. I think like you said, like I know I have worked as a defense contractor for a while, but like I don't have like any like secret clearance or anything like that. Like that's a whole nother story. Otherwise I wouldn't be able to talk about this. But like even in that, like the Snowden leaks did fundamentally change how computer scientists had to approach just encryption, decryption, that type of stuff, because like it showed that even at the point where computer science was at that time, that the government had already had tools that people were unaware of to be able to break through certain encryption algorithms. Like I think now it's like SHA-256 or something like that. Like there's like a bunch of encryption algorithms, and like how do you encrypt things where it would take not like you could feasibly decrypt it, but the time it would take to decrypt it would be like astronomical, where it's like unfeasible, right? But part of the big things that the Snowden leaks also leaked out, probably got less press attention, was that there was a bunch of these algorithms that were used at the time that people assumed were capable of stopping people in a sufficient amount of time where it wouldn't be feasible.
Right.
But those leaks show that the government actually had the ability to break through those encryptions in a feasible time.
Yeah.
So
I mean, some of them are based on math where you have some guarantees, and as long as quantum computing doesn't take off, which is a whole other issue that I'm not qualified to talk about. You know, like there's less worry. But there really are. I think that's really interesting hearing about it from the side of someone who's actually worked in the government, rather than just someone who was a high schooler listening to all of the cool Guardian reporters who were publishing, and Der Spiegel and stuff, who were publishing all of these absolutely, some of them just really crazy things about how the government would go in and introduce bugs into software that handle encryption and decryption, or even publish algorithms that on the surface looked like they were good math, but secretly were absolutely terrible at doing what they were supposed to be doing in the context of providing security. And I mean, and that's not even the whole secretly irradiating the Cubans and stuff like that, but I'm really glad that I didn't end up as a conspiracy theorist, just because of the Snowden leaks were something that I think especially on an impressionable person, an impressionable youth, really could very easily lead someone down the road of being a conspiracy theorist if you actually thought long and hard enough about the implications of the government doing these sorts of things. But yeah,
and there's a whole Iranian nuclear system thing that was
was that Stuxnet, or
Stuxnet was part of it.
Okay.
I mean, it was I think Symantec, which is a cybersecurity company. They released a full report about it after it all happened. But for those who are listening and don't know, the reason Iranian nuclear missiles don't exist is basically because of this incredibly elaborate computer worm that took, I think, over 3 years from start to finish to work. But they basically snuck, the way they snuck it is one part of the story, into the Iranian nuclear facility.
Right, because this is not something that's connected to the internet.
Right.
So there's actually no way to hack in remotely to these systems.
But it was on so many levels, it was just the way it was executed was ridiculous, because there's basically, when you're creating nuclear material, you have to centrifuge the uranium at a very precise speed, at a very precise time, and temperature, all that stuff. And you have these nuclear centrifuges that do that. So when these centrifuges are spinning, you need sensors to record what all that stuff is in order to modulate it so that it correctly purifies the uranium. So there's a grade where you purify uranium for nuclear power, and then there's a grade kind of above it for nuclear weapons. So most people had known that Iran was trying to get to the point where they could make nuclear weapons. So I guess this worm was, somehow they got it onto the system in a way where it would delete itself so that you would never know that it got onto the system. And it used 2 or 3 Windows operating system bugs that no one even knew existed at that point, to get into the system, to get root access privilege, access these sensors, and basically make it seem like the centrifuges were spinning at the speed they were supposed to. So when you're looking at the system on the computer system, it literally looks correctly, and then it would randomly speed up and slow down these centrifuges until they broke, and eventually every single centrifuge in that entire Iranian system just shut down, and they had no idea how, because on their system it told the computers that it was perfectly normal, and then it just completely wiped the entire nuclear processing facility, and then terminated itself also. So they had no idea what happened.
And just thinking about the kind of the level of the people who were working on it, like there's so much money even for more legitimate areas. And you worked in the defense industry, so for people in college, for example, in the fields like what we're in, like there's so much money in the defense industry. They just want to pick off all the brightest people. And I suppose the sort of people who are writing Stuxnet are kind of on the next level of like they probably get kidnapped and sent to the black site and forced to no, but I kind of have definitely in black sites. I have the maybe by their own choosing, at least somewhat. It's funny, this I'm getting a very Joe Rogan vibe from the way that this conversation has gone, and now we're like this is the conspiracy theories.
Yeah, I mean, man, the government is not good at doing a lot of things, but when it comes to the defense, like, there are aspects about defense that are pretty amazing. Like, because even the stuff that are starting to be declassified, because like the way declassification works, it's like usually like after 50 years, things get declassified, as long as it's still not considered sensitive. But even the stuff that have been declassified since the end of the Cold War are just like ridiculous. Like, when we were flying like basically reconnaissance missions over the Soviet Union, like back then there wasn't like internet, so like how do you take a camera that's in like a satellite above Earth that has film, like physical film, how do you get that information back to the ground in an efficient manner that like and in a timely manner where people who are generals can actually like make decisions on a worldwide basis like of that information. So actually, like I think it was Lockheed Martin.
Okay.
This has like since been declassified. I think it was called Project Corona. So like the way they figured out how to do it is they sent these satellites up into space. The satellite would fly over the Soviet Union, take these pictures on film, and then at a predetermined time they would drop the canister physically from the satellite. And as the canister was falling, they would have a jet fly by and like hook the canister as it was falling.
Like hook its parachute or
something? Hook its parachute, grab the canister, fly it to DC, and the entire thing took like an hour.
Wow.
Or something ridiculous. I don't know if it was in an hour, but like it was just like, that was the technology that we had back then. Back in like the 70s or 80s. So like who knows what we have now.
Right, yeah. But now we can get stuff from Pluto to Earth in a matter of hours.
Yeah.
And high def pictures too.
Yeah, so it's pretty crazy.
Yeah.
Nice. Well, I think we've been talking for quite a while. We've hit a lot of topics.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, do you have any other last thoughts about philosophy, artificial intelligence?
No. I mean, I think that the most interesting stuff, really, at the end of the day, is the stuff that does the basics, if that makes sense. We still struggle with a lot of we're getting better at producing specialized systems that do specialized things. Like in the world of bioinformatics, there's some amazing stuff involving protein whatever. I that's one thing I have not touched at all. And maybe if I wanted to make money in the tech field, I should have touched it more. But since I'm a philosopher, I don't need to worry about that. But in terms of general artificial intelligence, which is mostly what people think of when they hear artificial intelligence, you know, the actual robots that can, or what systems that can hold conversations with humans at a typical level. You know, we still have so far to go.
Yeah.
And it's not a matter of throwing more computational power at it, I don't think, because if that was all that it was, then Amazon would have Alexa would work a lot better than Alexa. Oh, I didn't mean to.
Oh yeah, there was an Alexa in this room, but it's okay.
You know, or Amazon or Google would have solved the problem. And so one thing that over the course of my time doing intelligent systems related stuff, I've kind of grown in my affinity towards looking to the natural sciences to give us information about where we need to go. So part of that is looking at the brain or looking at the mind in the more abstract sense in cognitive science. But also some of the stuff that I do in philosophy, I think really, for me, Right. So when I say what I do in philosophy, I mean I'm actually running simulations right now, which is a weird thing for philosophers to do. But it's something that I got introduced to through this department, and it's actually great as a person trained in software engineering. I can code up these simulations, try to get them as efficient as possible, and do things that people who aren't software engineers try to answer questions or clarify things that people who aren't software engineers haven't been able to do. But a lot of the sorts of simulation work that I'm doing now, I think, to me, does ultimately feed back into the question of, say, what is the nature of information processing in nature, right? Or just because turns out bacteria can send signals to each other and coordinate their actions. You know, animals, we've known for a long time, animals, mammals and stuff like that can do it. But even lower things than you know, primates and stuff like that still send signals. Birds send fairly sometimes complex signals, which really approximate little mini languages. And so those are some of the questions that I've started to investigate now. Logic and information processing in systems that we don't think of as intelligent in the human sense. But which still are doing things that
very complex.
But very complex that we don't have we don't have computers that do lifelike imitation of things. You know, it's all very artificial still. And I want to see the natural sciences, the biological sciences, and the cognitive sciences kind of pushing into the AI world more, because I think it might be cool what we can do, even if we never get to. I'm kind of a skeptic about general intelligence. But nonetheless, I think that for some specialized things like vision, what better way to learn how to do computer vision than studying the visual cortex in the brain? It seems to me, you know.
I mean, that's a whole other thing. It's like we have no idea about the brain. The brain is probably the one system that we have the least amount of information about in the human body. Like we don't even know how memory works. Really. There's a lot of theories.
There are theories, but that's another thing. Is like just because there are theories doesn't mean that any of them really hit on what needs to be hit on.
And even with technologies like MRI, we still don't know anything. So
we have more and more data. I think that I've been pretty impressed. I've gone to some talks. The cognitive science department here does a lot of stuff in that, and I've gone to talks where I've been pretty impressed with kind of the level of detail that goes into a particular study on the brain, but also the amount of data we kind of have. And yet then you pull out one tiny bit of information. The talk I went to recently was on the selection, like say you have you're focused on one thing and something off in the corner of your eye catches your attention because it's a flash of light or something. There are circuits in the brain that do those sorts of comparison between 2 points in your visual field and determine which one is more important, or which basically ultimately are sending signals like, hey, something's going on over here. And we actually have a little bit more information now about that one very small specific thing that the visual system does. But when you think about how much we need to learn, we still have a long way to go.
That we do. Indeed. We do indeed have a lot to go. Well, it's been great talking with you.
Yeah, it's been great. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. Thanks for taking the time and the early morning. And do you have any places where people can find you, maybe your work eventually? I don't know if you want to give that out. You don't have to.
I suppose these days, I guess my LinkedIn is the place that I maintain the most. If I move into philosophy, that's not ultimately going to be my home, I don't think.
Right, you'll probably be in some journal
somewhere.
Yeah,
true. Philosophers, I was just talking with one of my friends last night. They have places that they go, like academia.edu and stuff like that, where, but my LinkedIn right now. So, I suppose my name will be somewhere. So, Jack VanDrunen. I go by Jack. My full name is Jacob.
Okay.
I go by Jack. So,
cool.
So yeah, just, and I think if you Google, you'd find stuff. But,
Yep. All right. Thank you guys for tuning in. Have a good day.